America, and welcome to this election season's first episode of Between Two Ideologues, the political talk show that gives you two contrasting views on one guest. With us today is Democratic candidate Ryan Cox. Mr. Cox, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Malloy. I really appreciate you having us on the show, and Maida, thank you as well.
It's a pleasure. Mr. Cox, to start, we'd like to hear a brief statement from you of what you think the most important issues in this campaign are.
I think the most important issues in this campaign are abortion. I think I am personally pro-choice. I think also we need to examine Obamacare, which I'm again for, and we are also very supportive of new gun restrictions.
Mr. Cox, as an American, it disturbs me deeply that you're so opposed to the rights of the unborn. That you're so ready to snatch these precious lives away from the world. And I wonder if you could attempt to defend your position on that.
Mr. Cox, I just would like to interject for a second there. I would like to say how deeply I am in support of your role in helping out women's rights, and how glad I am that you're there for every woman out there.
Mr. Cox, I'd like to remind you that our nation was founded on Christian principles.
I would like to remind my co-anchor that this was a nation founded on the idea of secular
Well, why don't you just let Mr.
government?
Cox talk, all right?
Okay.
Mr. Cox.
Thank you, Malloy. Personally, I believe that it should be the woman's choice to decide whether to abort a marriage. When it comes down to it, it is her opinion that matters, and it should not be regulated by people in the government who do not understand the situation clearly.
But don't you feel that deregulation that permitting abortion is less a deregulation than an endorsement?
Don't you feel that Republicans are simply trying to force their Bibles onto women's ovaries?
Maida, that's an absurd formulation of the situation, one which I could object strongly. I'd like to note.
Why don't you let Mr. Cox speak, Malloy?
Well then, I will.
I think that while this argument is very, very interesting, I'm still pretty deeply rooted in my opinion that when it comes down to it, the woman needs to decide what's best for her, not only her current situation, but in the future. And I don't think you can let government officials decide that for someone.
So to summarize, you'd favor, you'd oppose all the abortion restrictions such as those that are being passed in other states by the governors?
That is correct, sir. Yes.
All right.
What would you say to those Republicans who wish to take women's rights back to the 1950s?
Why don't we move on to another topic? I'm personally interested to hear Mr. Cox's opinion on Obamacare. Mr. Cox, I and many of my fellow conservatives believe that Obamacare represents an unwarranted infringement on the individual's right to choose, and also on the free market.
Mr. Owen, I'm going to tell you a story. When I was 9 years old, I lost my father to lung cancer. He was a constant worker in a coal factory in Tazewell, Virginia. He couldn't afford health care, and he died as a result of his work. I firmly believe that we should not allow such travesties to occur in this country. We are a country founded on equality, freedom, and the ability of everyone to chase their dreams. My father's dream was taken from him at too young an age, and I cannot stand by while that happens to other good and just individuals.
Mr. Cox, that is a deeply tragic story, and I'm sorry even at this late date for your loss.
Thank you.
However, many conservatives would contend that such decisions, such programs are best left to the states as well, instead of interference from the national government, which might not have served your father or other at-risk individuals as effectively or in as nuanced a manner as the states or at the state or local level.
Well, I feel like you're maybe helping my point a little bit here, is that if Obamacare does not go through, I could push more legislation at a state level, as you just suggested there, and maybe not so much at a national level if it was shot down, as it might be at this current time.
Might be.
And so you would agree with the assessment that this is progressive legislation that would provide care to thousands of uninsured Americans and really provide for better quality of life. And that's more important than penny pinching or any other Republican idea of what would be more important than actual American lives.
Yes, I completely agree with you, Maida. Thank you very much.
Very well. Mr. Cox, you recently received an F rating from the National Rifle Association. and perhaps this doesn't bother you, but I think it may bother many Virginians. Do you believe that you're actually do you believe that you deserved this F rating, that you're actually opposed to all guns, as the NRA suggested, or is your approach more balanced? And
I feel the NRA may have oversimplified my position. I'm not trying to take away guns from every American. That's not my goal. My goal is to regulate the guns that are being distributed so that we do not give firearms to people who either cannot control them or would do very destructive things. This state is no stranger to gun violence, whether it was the Virginia Tech shootings several years ago or the recent Navy Yard shootings that happened just across our border. We're not immune to the violence that these firearms bring. We need to regulate them, and it needs to be clear to everyone in Virginia that we're not going to stand for hurtful, destructive individuals obtaining these weapons.
Well said, Mr. Cox. But don't you feel that besides the possible constitutional question, Second Amendment question,
I would just like to interject for a second there, Malloy. The Second Amendment only guarantees a right to a well-regulated militia. You can take down that argument about him violating the Second Amendment.
I believe the phrase is the right to bear arms, but that's irrelevant because the more important question is whether excessive government regulation of firearm purchases represents a dangerous precedent, whether having, for instance, a registry or
Malloy, are you advocating that
process.
Sex offenders should have weapons? Is that what I'm hearing right now?
I don't frankly
I believe that one Republican
that's
candidate
not particularly relevant.
I believe that is relevant. Why would
sex offenders have weapons?
Maybe they're going to wave a gun at a child and then try to molest them. How do we know?
The Republican Party has led the charge against sex offenders, and has been criticized for the Democrats for being excessively restricting the rights of sex offenders. So I think that other legislative measures should do very well to ensure that sex offenders don't get guns without implementing some kind of national registry or registration program.
I don't believe that's what Mr. Cox is advocating, is it?
I'd like to hear what he is advocating.
Thank you. I appreciate all these very prolonged discussions between the two of you. They bring up a lot of points that need to be addressed in not only my campaign, but the people I'm running against. I do not believe that we should be giving firearms to the sex offenders. I don't know where this entire conversation came from, but let me tell you,
absurd.
Let me tell you what I do stand for. I stand for a Virginia that is safer, smarter, and at the same time more efficient. If Ryan Cox is elected, I will speak not only for your rights, but for your freedoms and for this state.
So efficiency through the implementation of a vast government gun-controlling bureaucracy. That's your plan.
What?
You want to improve
because he wants
Virginia's
he advocates that
efficiency.
certain violent and dangerous criminals or the mentally ill not have weapons. You're saying that he's advocating a national gun registry. Where even is the
it's not at all
logic?
clear that his restrictions only extend to violent or the mentally ill. That's something you just constructed.
I believe I said that in my prior comments. I said I would. Sorry, I don't mean to attack you personally.
Please.
I'm just saying.
We'll look at the tape.
Okay. I personally agree with Ms. Kapoor on this. We definitely need to evaluate who is getting these destructive weapons in our society, and particularly the mentally ill and those who have committed crimes in the past.
Okay. Mr. Cox, much of Virginia's economy depends on the United States military, for instance, the Hampton Roads area. But many in your party advocate substantial cuts to military spending, such as those in the sequester or other cut programs. What is your stance on the question of cutting military spending?
The military is very, very vital to this country, but
and to Virginia, in fact.
Thank you.
I would just like to interject for a second there. The sequester was something that was brought on by Tea Partiers, members of your party, Malloy.
But in fact, the sequester bill's provisions for military cuts were wholeheartedly endorsed by many members of the Democratic Party. But, sorry, Mr. Cox.
What does that have to do with state politics, Malloy?
It's Virginia's economy we're talking about here, Maida.
That coming from a federal level.
Nonetheless,
what control does Mr. Cox have over such provisions?
Well, obviously he
doesn't control all the members of his party. Okay.
So I'd just like to hear what he thinks, if you don't mind.
What I was in the middle of saying is, Mr. Owen, is the national defense is very important to Virginia as well as the national government. I think you interrupted me mid-sentence, and I apologize for that. But there's the money that's being given to this branch can frankly be redistributed to other programs that potentially need it more. I believe Obamacare is very, very important, as I mentioned earlier with my small little anecdote. And I think we can always do more in other areas. I think defense right now we're not in the middle of a vast, huge, all-out war with another country. I think this might be the time to sort of step down how much we are spending on national defense.
But you recognize, Mr. Cox, that we have global enemies. We are engaged in a fight against terror, and on the African continent, for instance, it seems that Al-Qaeda is stronger than ever.
I think what Mr. Cox is trying to posit is how many tanks do we really need, Malloy?
It's not necessarily a question of tanks. It's a question of allotting the military the money it needs to function properly. Amanda.
If you look at the pork barrel fat that is spent from some of this military money, like for planes that that cannot even be used to for planes that aren't even functional for equipment that doesn't even work.
That's not a question of military spending allotment. That's a question of institutional reform. To move on, Mr. Cox, finally, I'd like to ask you. You've already discussed your personal story in a certain degree of detail, but there is a negative perception of you. It's been certain perceptions. It's been heightened by your opponent's attack ads, of course. But your Washington connections have come under a lot of fire. Your golf playing habits, your golf partners, and so forth. What can you do to convince us that you're a man of the people and you're not just a Washington insider who's going to foist partisan politics that you're not going to foist Washingtonian partisan politics on Richmond?
Well, let me start by addressing that golf comment. At the age of 9, when my father passed away, I went to a yard sale and I found a club and a ball, and I bought those for basically a dime. I played with those clubs, I only hit that club, and I fell in love with the game. It was an escape from the terrors and the tragedy that had just befallen my family. I continue it to this day because it reminds me not only of a time when I was happy, when everything else around me was falling apart, but I play it also because it's a good place to do business. While you may think that what goes on the golf course is elitist or destructive, what happens when I and my fellow senators go out on the golf course is purely bipartisan. I've frequently played with Republican members of the Senate, and we have a good time. We discuss policy, and I would say that more often than not, good comes out of those playings rather than bad.
But Mr. Cox,
how is this even pertinent to his policy, Malloy?
It's a concern that he's a Washington insider, as I discussed. And of course,
I'm
Mr.
not
Cox,
really sure what
your
what
golf
that has
games.
To do with anything
I respect the idea that you'd play with your colleagues in the legislature, but your golf games have not been limited purely to fellow members of government. We have a number of instances on record of you playing with various business executives and so forth.
Can you please,
and Mr. Cox, I'm not sure that the kind of business that goes on your golf courses is the kind of business that Virginians want.
First of all, let me say one thing. I do not own a golf course. I play on the public courses provided by this state. And also, I would challenge you to name any of these business executives that I have played with.
We'll check our files.
So I would appreciate.
We have a ticker called "Who is Ryan Cox playing golf with today?" I'll scroll through it and find some examples and get back to you.
I appreciate that. Now let me tell you why. Even though you are addressing concerns that I'm some Washington overlord, I'm not. I am the candidate with the most political experience in this race. Mr. Wagner does not have any. He comes from MIT with a degree in particle physics and economic theory. And Mr. Afton, while he has some political experience, it's not nearly as much as my 10 years in the Virginia House of Delegates and my 6 years in the Senate.
I understand that, but many Virginians at this point maybe are looking for something of a fresh face. I don't mean to say somebody with no political experience, but I think
how long have you
lived
in Virginia, Mr. Cox?
All my life.
I think that's all the people really need to hear.
Very well. I can't argue with that. Well, I think unless Maida has any further questions for Mr. Cox, I
I'm
think
all good, Malloy.
today's episode of Between Two Ideologues may be finished. So I thank you, America, for for watching the show, and we look forward to seeing you on our next show when we expect to interview Libertarian candidate Dan Wagner.